Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sophie Williams. I am the author of Anti-Racist Ally, and I'm also the author of an upcoming book called Millennial Black, which is coming out next year. I run the Instagram account, Official Millennial Black, where I share information about anti-racism and what people can do to turn their privileges into action. I want to thank Waterstones so much for hosting us today and for asking me to be a part of this. I can honestly say that I have never said yes to anything more quickly. I also have to say that I'm a little nervous. It's not often that you get to speak to people who have done such amazing things. And so if I get a little tongue-tied, I'm just going to trust that you are all here with me and that you all have my back, because we all want this to be cool. So we're going to be talking about punching the air. And I have my well-worn copy here. But let me read you a few words about what the book is about for those of you who maybe just haven't had a chance to get your copy of the book yet. So Punching the Air follows Amal Shahid, a teenager who has always been a poet and an artist, but even in a diverse art school, he's seen as disruptive and unmotivated as part of a biased system. Then, one fateful night, an altercation in a gentrifying neighbourhood escalates into tragedy. Boys will be boys, boys just being boys, turns out to only be true when those boys are white. Suddenly, at just 16 years old, Amal's bright future is upended when he's convicted of a crime that he didn't commit and sent to prison. Despair and rage almost sink him until he turns to the refuge of his words and his art. So we are so lucky to have the two authors of this amazing book with us today, Ibi Zoboi and Dr. Yusef Salaam. We're going to talk about the book and its themes, and here they are. We're going to talk about the book and its themes and how it fits in with the current cultural conversation in America and beyond. I'm going to save 10 or 15 minutes at the end for your questions. So if you have anything that you want to say or want to ask, just pop it into the chat box and I will try to make sure that I get to it. I wanted to give you a quick introduction to both of the authors. So Ibi holds an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her novel American Street was a National Book Award finalist and a New York Times notable book. She's also the author of Pride and My Life as an Ice Cream Sandwich, a New York Times bestseller. She is editor of the anthology Black Enough, and she now lives in New Jersey with her husband and 3 children. If you want to see more from Ibi, you can find her, you can find her online at ibzoboi.net. Dr. Yusef Salaam was just 15 years old when his life was upended after being wrongfully convicted in the Central Park jogger case, along with 4 other boys who are now known as the Exonerated 5. In 2002, after the young boys spent years of their lives behind bars, their sentences were overturned and they were fully exonerated. The story behind this has been well documented in the award-winning film The Central Park 5 and in Ava DuVernay's highly acclaimed Netflix. So thank you so much both for joining me. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. So this book is amazing. I was just saying to both of the authors before we went live that I read it in one sitting and I loved it, but also it's really hard. It's really emotional. I wanted to stop sometimes, not because it wasn't good, but because it just has so many feelings in it and it makes you feel so much. Which is incredible. So I'd really love to hear the story of how you two came to work together. Maybe Ibi, could you start by letting us know sort of how did that partnership come to be?
Well, I grew up in New York City, very much like Youssef, and I was actually in the 6th grade. I was 11 years old when I learned of the Central Park 5 jogger case, when it happened actually. And I had our 6th grade teacher would bring in the newspapers every day because we would do current events in class So I followed the news stories just like everyone else in New York City. However, it wasn't until 10 years later, I think exactly 10 years later in 1999, that I was taking college courses at Hunter College in New York City. And in walks this young man, and our professor embraced him. And she said something to the effect of, "I knew you didn't do it." And we soon found out that he is none other than Yusef Salaam of the Central Park Five. And I was the editor of my newspaper, my college's newspaper at that time. And I went after him for an interview. We ended up talking for a couple of hours. I never got that interview, but I ran into him again 3 years ago while I was promoting my first book, American Street. And he was selling his self-published book of poetry. And I thought it was a grave injustice to us that he was self-published and he had not already gotten an outlet to tell his own personal story. And this was before the Netflix series, When They See Us. So of course, it was a meeting of the minds. And as they say, the rest is history.
Amazing. Oh, I can't imagine the sort of scenario of just like being like, oh wow, okay, I'm gonna go and talk to that person. Like, amazing. Like, Youssef, what's your sort of recollection of how you two ended up working together?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of this particular story, especially showing up on the scene at this particular point in time, is that we wanted to work together, and we had, so to speak, hatched a plan. And that plan was that we were going to really tell my story. But because I was involved in the contracts of creating When They See Us with Ava DuVernay, I couldn't do my story. So the beautiful experience that we see in our book, Punching the Air, it really is the story of Black America. It's the story of what happens to Black and brown children, the story of being to being denied privilege, to being denied humanity, right? And when we were talking about this story, Evie and I were like, wow, we're going to do something that's going to be really amazing. And I tell you, the outpouring of love and support that we've been receiving so far has been tremendous. It's really been tremendous. The way, just the positioning of this book at this moment in time for us to be able to kind of have the conversation that we need to have, especially in America. I mean, around the world as well, but in America, because of the current political climate, and everything that's going on, we really need to figure out how do we step forward, and what is the step, what is the way forward.
So interesting. It's so interesting how the political climate and the things that affected you then are sort of very much topical now. And I think we're going to come on to that. And I'm going to let you both lead that conversation, because obviously that's an American election and that's not something that sort of is touching our skin in the same way. But Youssef, when you and Evie reconnected in 2017, you said that you wanted to talk to her and to reach teen readers. Why was that teen readership important to you?
I realized that what happened to me and what I was seeing in the prison industrial complex as a young person was the light being put out, especially in young people. The more young people began to believe the false narration that was being presented to them, the more they thought that they were born a mistake. And as they thought that, they began to move throughout their lives as if they didn't matter. And I thought that it would be such a really noble and honorable thing to be able to share my experience with, so to speak, fresh ideas and in a new way, because sometimes I may step out on a stage and people see me, I'm usually dressed in a suit and a tie, and there's a disconnect. People are like, this guy couldn't have gone to prison. He looks like an attorney or something like that, or a politician, and I don't necessarily do that because I'm trying to get the people to judge the cover without reading the content of our character. But I do know that when you change the way you look, you change the way you feel about yourself. So when I'm coming out on stage, I'm coming out there to show people I don't look like what I've been through. But now I needed to be able to tell people, and especially young people, Frederick Douglass said that it's better to build strong young people than to repair broken men. And so this is my attempt at taking that opportunity to tell a story with Evie that really becomes water for the seeds of greatness inside of us, allows us to look at our experience and say, we aren't crazy, because the rest of the world is trying to tell us that we're crazy. Come on, look, we're giving you the crumbs off the table, be happy. And the truth of the matter is that the table, the same very table that most of us are getting our crumbs off of, happens to be the same table that we built, happens to be our table. And the realization of that, because we've always known, but now we're getting an opportunity to matter of fact, like in a matter of fact kind of way, know. Not being not humble, but still being humble, still really looking at the humanity of all people and trying to speak to that humanity, trying to pull at the heartstrings of people, to remind them that even though we're talking about politics, even though people say it's business and so forth and so on and not personal, that this business, this political climate, the folks who are there to protect and serve us are dealing with our lives. And this is a very precious, very sacred thing that they hold in their hands, and that we've hired you to do that in many ways, and they don't see themselves in that space. You know, they don't see that they are working for us, that we pay the taxes that they get their salaries from. And I think that that's something that is being shifted, you know. And so this book shows up right on time, because on the one hand, it gives people the opportunity to have the conversation, but on the other hand, it lets young people know, man, I'm not crazy. Wow, okay, I knew something was fishy about the way that they were teaching me not to go into my own greatness and to stay shrunk down into the corners of life. No, God created you to be magnificent, to give all of your presence and all of your gifts to the world. You know, and this is one offering through Punching the Air, like I said, to be able to give the water to the seeds inside of each and every one of us, especially young people, so that they know I can move on and I can keep on being great, and I don't have to be apologetic about it.
So much of what you've just said is incredible. Yeah, the young people, yeah, just giving water to those seeds, just giving them the opportunity and the means to grow and become what they were meant to become is incredible. And I think it's so interesting that you talk about sort of learning to say, like, we're not crazy, because I think so much of the society that we're in relies on telling us that we're imagining it, or we are blowing it out of proportion, or we're sort of wrong somehow. No matter what we say, we're wrong. And I think racial gaslighting is a conversation that we're starting to have more and more at the moment, because so much of the narrative is like, well, no, that's not your experience. I'm sure they didn't mean it like that. I'm sure that that's not quite what happened. It's just like I think it's so important that we're having these conversations and that we're saying to people, you're not alone, and you're not imagining it. This is real. And I think there's a real power in that connectivity. So thank you for that. I think that's incredible.
Yes, indeed.
So Punching the Air begins with an event that jeopardizes the main character's promising future because he is wrongly accused and then goes through an unjust system. So I think we've touched on it a little bit already, but how do you see Amal's story as a reflection of our society, particularly in light of what's happening in both of our countries right now? Ibi, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, you know, what happens to Amal is that he gets into a fight. And that is not so extreme when we talk about young men and even young women. I got into fights when I was in high school. When Yusef and I were working on this, we had to think about a crime that was different from his. Of course, we did not want to make it his story. And we didn't want this boy to be accused of rape. That is a huge, 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 you know, thing to be accused of, especially for the Central Park Five or exonerated five. So we wanted an entry point that all children can relate to. Many boys, many girls have been in fights, and what happens when that one heated moment goes wrong. So in terms of how that relates to our society and the UK, I think it's just a microcosm of confrontations between the two demographics. It's Black and white meeting along the edges, meeting at the border, meeting at the boundaries, and what happens when those tensions come to a head. And we've seen that in the US when there are protests, when the protesters and law enforcement are meeting right at that line, and there is a moment of just explosive confrontation. And fortunately, there hasn't been any fatalities resulting from that. In Nigeria, there have been fatalities. UK, I'm not sure of what happens during those protests, but all racial incidences are all about the two tensions coming to a head in one heated moment. And we decided to make it that crime because we didn't make it up just out of thin air. We were reaching back for the racial incidences that were happening in New York City when we were growing up. We were not responding to what was happening today around the world. We grew up without internet, so we only knew what was happening locally in our area from the news. And there was enough fodder for this sort of, for what we wrote into the story from our childhood. We could name 5 racial incidences in New York City that we witnessed before the Central Park 5 jogger case, or around the Central Park 5 jogger case. There was another young man who had the same name as Youssef Hawkins. Now he wasn't accused of a crime, but he ventured into a white neighborhood and was killed just a few months after the Central Park 5 jogger case. And this is what it's based on. We're also basing it on a young man named Michael Griffith, who ventured into a white neighborhood, and he was chased out by a group of white teens with bats. And while they didn't hurt him, he was so scared that he ran into oncoming traffic in a highway and was killed that way. So all of these were from when I was in elementary school and middle school. So we didn't have to even choose from something in 2019 or 2018. We were able to reach back. Oh, let's go back to 1980 something, and it'll still be relevant in 2020. So what does that say about both our countries? In that we can go back to our childhood. We can go back to our grandparents' time, right? Scottsboro boys. We can reach back in global history for inspiration to tell a story that is still relevant today. And when we talk about punching the air, we would want to tell young people, well, why is that? Why is that maybe somebody will tell a 2050 version of punching the air and it'll still be relevant? In the same way that Walter Dean Myers wrote Monster in 1999, which is very similar to punching the air. That was the year that we met. That was 21 years ago. So in terms of that, why does this keep happening? And what is it that we need to do so that maybe this will be the last book that is written for young people about mass incarceration, because that's the hope, that's ultimately.
I think that's so interesting and so true and so saddening that you're right. We can draw from things that have happened so long ago, it's happened decades ago, and they're still relevant and they still ring true, and we can still feel them on our skin. We can still feel that experience. And I think so much of the conversation, like so many people are having the conversation about race in 2020 that they weren't having last year or 2 years ago. And I think so often that's framed as a new conversation, or it's more important now than ever. And I really don't vibe with that at all. It's not new, it's not more important now than ever. It's just that sort of various societal elements have come together so that people are willing to talk about it now and engage with it now, but it's not new. And I think really showing that history is so important. But I'd be really interested to know also, I'm really sorry that I keep pronouncing your name wrong. I think pronouncing someone's name correctly is sort of a very basic courtesy to give them. So I'm going to try to do my best to get better at that.
You know what? I actually like it.
Well, no, I should do better, and I'm going to try to.
Okay.
So, either of you, I'd really love to hear about where the title "Punching the Air" came from.
Well, punching the air is for me. It talks really to what happens when you find yourself in a space where you really don't understand. You know, you're trying to figure out what to do next. And so punching the air literally for me was when I was inside of the prison and the other inmates were telling me, we're going to get you. And I'm thinking, how am I going to shadow box and survive? How am I going to keep enough people off me so that I don't get hurt? You know, and then also at the very end of this, not necessarily punching the air per se, but at the end of story of tragedy where there's victory, punching the air is also a gesture of victory where you've won, you know. And so in this particular space, we're kind of going through, how do you fight a system that is eluding you as well? It's like punching at smoke. You know, you think that it's over here, you think it's over there. You feel like, okay, I finally got it. And then next thing you know, you're eluded again, you know? So it kind of has those layers there. And I know Evie and I, we were talking about there's a space in the book too, that the actual title is pulled from, you know?
Yeah, there are a couple of poems that mention it. That's where we were combing through poems just to see if we could get a line that would be the title for the book.
So as you just alluded to, the book is in poem, the book is in verse, the book has this really amazing poetic, lyrical quality to it. Evie, what made you collectively decide that that was how you wanted to tell this story, that was how you wanted your sort of words to come through?
Well, when I ran into Yusef in 2017, he was selling his self-published book of poetry. And of course, the idea didn't come then, but I had read a poem called I Stand Accused that was written by him. And I later found out that he wrote it at 16 and he recited it in the courtroom. So I Stand Accused was actually in Punching the Air, was the first poem. And unfortunately, it got edited out just to make the story much smoother. We needed to, you know, just have Amal grow into that sort of mindset. And that mindset was Yusef at 16 making the connections between prison industrial complex to slavery, which is part of the 13th Amendment in the US Constitution. And Yusef can speak more about that loophole. But for him to be making that sort of larger world contextual connections spoke to the kind of kid that he was at 16. I found it very fascinating that he was so incredibly politically and culturally and socially aware while he was facing this grave injustice. And that is the foundation for who Amal, the character, is. He is very socially aware, can articulate his experiences while he's going through that emotional journey of being wrongly incarcerated. And we both wanted it to be emotionally impactful. And we know I'm a poet as well. I was a spoken word poet in college. And we both knew that poetry is the best way to get that sort of message across, to say as much as we can possibly say in very few words to capture this boy's emotional journey. And Yusef can speak to the kind of poem that I Stand Accused is and why he wrote it at 16.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I Stand Accused was my last stance. It was like me being on the battleground, knowing I'm about to be put to death. And what do I say? What is the last thing that I will leave there in the world? And it was, I stand accused, that I'm not guilty of this crime, that this crime that they have attributed to me, you know that I'm not guilty of it. I know that I'm not guilty of it. And the proof of the legal process that we're going through, or rather that we're being hoodwinked through, is showing that I'm not guilty of this crime, and neither are the guys who've been associated with it either. You know, they made people believe that we all knew each other. They made people believe that we had somehow concocted this idea, this plan that said, hey, listen, we're going to get together tomorrow and go wilding, which is important because when you look at the language that was being used around that time, it's the same language that's being used in the 1950s. It's that language and the artistry that paints the picture of the, in this case, the victim, right? So there are multiple victims. There's the victim herself, who was brutally assaulted, raped, and left for dead. And then there's the victims who are going to become the scapegoats for this particular crime. And the worst thing that happens in these particular instances is that the real criminals usually are left out there to commit more crime because they don't have the criminal. It's different if you've done the crime and they've cleaned up things. It's almost like when you look at mass shootings in America and you say to yourself, how did all of the mass shootings stop? It's because we were under lockdown. It's because of COVID-19. And that's the craziest thing in the world, to think about it from that real life perspective, that we are being saved because we are fighting two pandemics in America. One, which is COVID-19, which is the global pandemic, and the other pandemic, which is oppression, where we are being kneeled on and choked to death. You know, we are being shot in our homes when we wake up from sleep, like a Breonna Taylor. You know, it's the real life experience. But then you realize, wait, what happened to all the shootings? Those minds are still there. This is not just politics, so this is not just a political climate. These are people's lives that we are dealing with. And so, you know, one of the best things, I've always kind of spun it back to Punch in the Air, is that we're really giving us an opportunity to speak to the humanity of us as a people, because someone has to give the order for the oppressive mind to become what it naturally is. And I'm saying that from a perspective of when we think about children aren't taught racism, but somehow if the ones who grow up in a racist, white supremacist, so to speak, mind frame, you know, that right there is being taught. That right there is being nurtured. And so we have to figure out, now, how do we fix that? How do we, first of all, show the mirror so that the reader is looking at this book and saying, oh, shucks, I am that officer with the tattoos of the black and brown babies around my neck. I am the teacher who is mislabeling and misidentifying brilliance and calling it stupidity. You know, the value and the validation that has to happen when you're dealing with the future caretakers of tomorrow has to be understood. And if it's not, then we have to create a system that kind of thing thrives and the other thing dies.
You're saying is so incredible. My cat has just decided to come on the table and be part of this conversation because of the joys of lockdown. What you're saying is so incredible. I think you're really sort of drawing so many parallels between the book and your life. And I know we've sort of touched on it in sort of these more abstract ways. But I'm sure that people who are watching and people who are listening would really love to just ask the question, how much of this book and the feelings and the experiences, Yusef, are based on your experience of being wrongfully incarcerated?
Well, I mean, I would say that the book is based on my life, but it's not my life. So it's a fictionalized version of what could happen. But because it's something that always happens in American criminal justice, that we call it the criminal system of injustice, that, you know, tomorrow, unfortunately, will we see somebody else? You know, we always see these atrocities happen. And it's not that we want to see it balanced. We don't want to see it at all. We want to be able to put oppression out of business. We want to put racism out of business. We want to bring back humanity in a way that sweeps across the nation. You know, Dr. King, in his I Have a Dream speech, really gave us an opportunity to understand that he was talking about being able to walk hand in hand, yes, but he was really talking about peace. He was talking about imagining and reimagining America to be the land of the free, the home of the brave, the place where people can go and dream their wildest dreams and not be awakened to the American nightmare. But the fact that we still are talking about these types of things 150 years after emancipation in America, it says a lot. It says a whole lot. And the concerted effort is even more impactful because, you know, I'm reminded of what Dr. James Baldwin said when he said, to be African American is to be American without privilege and African without memory. Because the job that was done to the Black person in America was the total erasing of the memory of where they came from. And so both Eva and I, when we met each other in a classroom that was reconnecting us to our African selves, our African identity. And I think that because of that, it gave us the opportunity to move in life in a way that was more meaningful, that said everything that we do has to make sense. Everything that we do has to speak life and give life and be a change agent, you know? And I think that that's the beautiful thing about this, you know, so there are parallels. There's poetic instances where I am, you know, doing those kinds of things in prison. Thankfully, I wasn't harmed in a manner that was irreparable, you know, but it's a beautiful way to tell my story and connect it with the experience that we have, the shared collective experience that we have in America that becomes very familiar. You know, when people read this book, they're like, wow, they can see it. And we want them to see it, but we want them more so to see themselves walking in the shoes of all of the people. And I'm saying that from whether you're a white reader, a Black reader, you know, an Asian reader, wherever you come from, I want you to be able to understand we have to be the answers to the question. We are the saviors of our own selves. And when we join forces in saving ourselves, we save the world.
So many feelings, there's so much in it, and it's so incredible the way that you've expressed it. And I think you talk about it being sort of really resonant to sort of all Americans and the American dream, but I think you need to know that it's resonant really beyond that. Like as a British reader, as just an English person, like it really feels true. It feels like I can't feel it, but it feels like I can feel it. It feels like I understand it. And again, I know that I don't to sort of the deepest degree, but it really feels personal. It really feels like a thing, and it feels like an incredibly important thing. I think it's really interesting that you make the point about not looking for retribution, because that's never what this has been about, I don't think. It's never been sort of what any of us have talked about or looked for. And I think even when we see things like the Medusa statue that was recently unveiled in America, sort of the retelling of Medusa where she's holding Perseus's head. And that was sort of attributed to like, oh, this is like the Me Too narrative, we're reclaiming it, we're the victors now. And the founder of the Me Too movement, Tarana Burke, has been like, no, this has never been about this. This has never been about revenge or retribution. It's just about, we don't want this to happen to anyone. It's not that we don't want it to happen to us, it just can't keep happening. I think that's such an important part of the message. And I think that loss of identity piece is also really universal as well. So from the Black British experience, we also don't have that narrative about where we come from. We don't have that narrative of that legacy and that history or those roots. And I think we're also one step removed as well, because we're so often told that it's an American story. Mm-hmm. So not only do we not have sort of those personal connections to our roots, we're told that we shouldn't look for them because it's just slavery is an American story, the lack of emancipation is an American story. And I think that narrative is really applicable in a much more global sense. I think you did an amazing job. You really speak to sort of this whole sort of wider conversation. One of the themes in the book is fate and being destined for a certain outcome or a certain point in your life, no matter sort of the different paths that you take and how to get there. So Evie, could you talk a little bit maybe about the school to prison pipeline and why that was an important part of having that in that story, that feeling of that inescapableness of that point?
Yeah, so the school to prison pipeline just means that there are disparities in how Black children are punished for things that all children do. The high suspension rates among Black children, the high expulsion rates. I know in the United States, a girl as young as 6 years old was handcuffed and taken into a police car because she was having a tantrum, she was having a bad day. Of course, that sort of trauma leads to other types of behaviors, and it's an endless cycle. When Black children are suspended, they spend 3 days out of school. Depending on the type of community that they live in, they'll probably be out on the streets getting into more trouble. So there are studies that show that unjust punitive measures in certain schools lead to more violence, leads to more criminality, in the same way that incarceration is not restorative, it leads to more criminality as well, depending on what happens within those four walls. So that is the school to prison pipeline in like a nutshell. And we wanted to show that. We wanted to show that Amal is not a squeaky clean kid. I don't think one exists. He gets into a fight, he fights like every other kid. And we wanted to show that, this is a confrontation between a Black kid and a white kid, to make it clear that there are disparities between how those two demographics are treated. One is seen as violent, and just angry. The other one is a victim. Maybe he can get into a fight too, but how can a white boy come against a Black boy who probably is stronger, right? There's that stereotype that we're stronger, we're more prone to violence. So all of that just shows up, and we didn't, there are metaphors, but we just wanted to be very clear about that. Amal talks about getting into a fight in the 5th grade and being suspended. There are schools at least in New York City or all over this country, where there's a zero tolerance policy in order to curb certain behaviors. But when you do that, you're not addressing the root of the behavior. If a child comes in tired and hungry and acts out in class, you're not asking what is going on at home with a clear understanding of how home life, right, and generational trauma affects how they're going to behave in school. We're just addressing the symptom and not the root cause, the virus. And that virus is societal. It's not on an individual thing. It is lack of opportunities. It is disenfranchisement in certain communities. All these things are not addressed in a global by, I mean, like a big picture sense. So yeah, we just had to put that in there. And I don't know, Yusef and I didn't really talk about all those things that may have happened in his childhood, and whether he can see a direct correlation from elementary school and middle school to what happened on that fateful night in April of 1989. Can you see? I mean, no one was talking about school to prison pipeline in 1989, of course.
No, I don't think that it was. I don't think that the description / definition had been given to it, although there had been the discussion about, the conspiracy to destroy, Black bodies, when it comes to Black boys and Black girls.
I said there was that book. Yeah. There's a book actually called The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys.
Yeah, by Dr. Juanza Kunjufu. Yeah.
Do you have like a memory of elementary school where you were unfairly punished? Or high school or middle school?
I don't. And I think part of the reason why that is because of prison, unfortunately. And so the memory of what was is not as clear because prison was such an abrupt trauma that was placed upon me and that I went through. But to be able to see and to be able to identify, like reading Malcolm X in prison did tremendous service to me, being able to read that he wanted to be, I think it was a lawyer or something like that, and the teacher saying, no, you would be better suited as this menial job. Why not allow the child to become great? Somebody has to be able to do that, right? But the thing that's really brilliant, I think, is finding purpose, right? And I think that's the journey of life. Like when you're looking at life and you're saying, why am I here? You're really trying to find out what is your purpose in life. And the beautiful thing about it is that I remember reading something from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said that when you find your purpose in life, do it as if God himself called you to do it at this very moment. Do it in such a way that nobody else can do it better than you. And instead of giving us a great idea of what purpose could be, he gives us the most simplest example that we can all relate to. He said, if your purpose in life is to be a street sweeper, sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep the streets like Beethoven composed music, like Leoton Price sang before the opera. Because it's about finding purpose. It's about knowing that psychosocially you matter. Even the street sweeper matters, right? And when you give value to what that kind of essential worker looks like, right? In America, I think perhaps around the globe, they were talking about the essential workers, and then essential businesses began to open up and probably perhaps were never closed. But part of the essential businesses that were never closed were places that you could go to numb the effect of life that's happening to you. And so you could go to the liquor store and get some alcohol, it's a really, really interesting thing that happens. But I think the overarching opportunity that we have in the world right now, as we reorient ourselves, is to really understand what matters. What matters in a very matter-of-fact kind of way. Because what mattered before COVID-19, for most people, does not matter now.
Yeah.
We are looking towards other things in life. And I think that when we look at that, we also have to understand that what has been vibrating in us that we have to be able to give the world. We should take what it is that is inside of us and give birth to it, because if we don't, then the most valuable places, as my good friend Les Brown says, is in the graveyard. That's the place where all of the value of the world is. It's the place where people's hopes, dreams, and aspirations have gone to die because people said, you know what, I'll do it tomorrow. What happens if tomorrow never comes for you? It's about being able to give life to what it is that you're supposed to give, because the rest of the world will be deprived if you didn't give it.
Yeah, I think that conversation is incredible and so important and so timely to where we are as a world at the moment. And I think more than ever, potentially, we can talk about a sort of a more global experience. We're all living in this pandemic. We're all living in this situation that we didn't see coming, and we're all dealing with it, if not in the same way, then at least dealing with the same thing. So the conversation about, like, we don't recognize the root causes. Children are coming to school hungry. Children are coming to school sort of not in the mindset to be able to learn. We have the same thing in the UK. There's lots of conversation about young Black children being perceived as older than they are. And so not only are they failing because of the zero tolerance policy, they're being treated more harshly because they're being viewed as older. In that same conversation is in the way that Black people are viewed as being stronger, and in other ways just sort of superhuman in ways that we don't expect other groups to be. And in the UK, we just had a vote in Parliament this week about, so it's half term, so like between like a week off from school, and Parliament has just decided that they are not going to extend free school meals for people who need them during this period, which would be something that would be relatively, I think, simple and affordable to do, especially considering that MPs themselves have subsidised food. We've decided that children who are in the most need do not need this sort of support system to carry them through. And I think so often that we give children's worth based on the worth that we ascribe to their parents, and that sort of essential worker conversation that we were having. And I don't know what your backgrounds are. Like, my mum is a cleaner, my dad is a grave digger. Like, we can't just say that people don't need these things. People rely on these things as ways to be able to exist. I think it's so awful the way that things are going. So I'm aware we don't have long left. If you are viewing, please put questions in the chat. I can see that some people are doing that right now. I've got lots more questions, but I'm going to skip ahead to one, which is that this book was written before the murder of George Floyd. There's a scene in the book where Amal is beaten up by the prison guard, which I think is really reminiscent of that murder. It's on page 143, and they say, "I don't even know when it happens. He grabs me, and in seconds, 4 officers are on me, pressing my head against the cold, hard floor. Knees on my throat, my jaw, my face, my head crushed. And that, I think, for anyone who reads this book now, is going to be so reminiscent of that murder, that awful, terrible murder that resonated around the world. How does that death, that murder of George Floyd and others, I think, impact how readers should look at Punching the Air? For either one of you who'd like to answer first.
You know, Denzel Washington said, oppression is not getting worse, but it's getting filmed. And, you know, one of the most important things that happens in this kind of truth telling, even though it's fiction, is that this is the story that we can identify with, because this is the story of yesterday. This may be the story of tomorrow. How many young people have been choked? How many young people have been disrespected and disregarded as trash? You know, I think that it showing up in our book really speaks volumes, because we have not yet gotten over and been afforded the opportunity to be given justice in the same way. Like, so in America, they have the Constitution of the United States. And in the Constitution of the United States, I believe it opens up by saying, we the people. The United States, the people in the United States, the people who have citizenship in the United States, we live in a divided states of America, and we have been living in a divided states of America since we were brought here and made into slaves. We weren't slaves, we were made into slaves, right? And so for the founding documents to harp on we the people, and for the conversation in America to disregard the history of slavery in America, is part of what restores things, is us looking at that and saying we have to do something about it. Black bodies have not been counted, and Black bodies need to be counted. It is not enough to say all lives matter when a Black person says Black lives matter, because when you're saying all lives matter, you're really saying your life is not life. Our life is life. That's what you're really saying. Because if you really meant all lives matter, and you're really talking about Black life included, you would then say, yes, you're right, Black life matters. We have to make sure that Black life matters, you know. And so there's this whole reorienting that has to happen. But I think that the painting of the picture of injustice, the painting of the picture of oppression, as it relates to Amal, right? Amal, his name means hope. And so in some way, Amal is the character that has to go through something in order for us all to grow through something. And for us all to be able to be better on the other side of the page, looking at our lives and understanding how it fits and figuring out, wow, is this me? Or do I know someone like this? Can I use my privilege to change someone's life? And that's really what it's about. Not recognizing oppression as not real, but recognizing it, but not giving it any value, any worth, any power. You know, what our professor, both Evie and I had a professor in college, the class that we met in. I remember her saying one day, she said, you know, if we decided that oppression, what we now call white supremacy, white male dominance, if we decided that that ceases to exist tomorrow, it will cease to exist tomorrow. Because guess what? It needs us in order to exist. We're giving fire and fuel to it, and therefore it is existing off of us. All we got to do is refuse.
That's incredible. And it's so many people say, I just don't feel like I have the power. I don't feel like I can do anything. I don't have enough of a voice, enough of a platform. And you're right. We give them the power. We give them the ability. They need us. And if we have nothing but the power to be part or not be part of it. So some audience questions are coming in, and I'm aware that we only have a couple of minutes left. So although I'm loving this and I want to do it for the rest of my life, please. So Evie, we have a question from Kathleen, who wants to know what the collaborative writing process was like and if there was anything unexpected.
Well, for me, I was both journalist and interpreter. I could not have written this without Yusef's poems and Yusef's perspective and worldview. We talked a lot, and our conversations were not necessarily about what needs to happen next in the story. It was Yusef sharing with me in the way that he just shared with everyone here. It's big picture, philosophical, reflective kind of storytelling. And certain things that he says quite often, I was able to put into poems. For example, he says the whole acronym DNA. He doesn't say DNA, he says the actual words that
deoxyribonucleic acid.
Says it so often that I had to have a poem there called DNA. And I had to really take that, well, what is he saying here? And what do I believe? It's not just that he's sharing with me, I have to believe it myself and understand what he's saying in order for me to interpret it into poetry. So DNA has such a huge impact on any case, on any trial where there's a victim and a perpetrator. And what does it mean for Black men where their DNA presence, their DNA connection to a crime changes their life? And what if it's not there and it still impacts whether or not, and they still sent to jail? And I make the DNA connection to the history of Black men being wrongly accused of crimes or being the perpetrators of crime as well. So DNA connects us to our ancestors. And what does that mean? That maybe you're bound to this life if the society tells you this is in your DNA. This is just a question that Amal has. So I was able to take that idea that Yusef has and expand it. Certain things like the butterfly effect is thinking about like all boys, anybody who's involved in a crime, that split second decision to go left instead of right and how that may change your life. So the butterfly motif comes up, and I think that came up somewhere in a conversation. So it's taking nuggets and expanding it. There are about 5 poems in Punching the Air that are actually Yusef's words while he was incarcerated. And those served as the foundation and the framework for the voice of Punching the Air.
I'm literally just like clutching it, like I'm just like, oh, like I can just listen to you talk about it all day. It's incredible. Thank you. I'm going to do one more audience question, and then I'm going to go to the final pre-prepared question, and then we'll wrap it up. So Mrs. Mary B. Jackson is, Ms. Mary B. Jackson is asking, how important is the forthcoming American election in terms of really making America the land of the free and the home of the brave? Youssef, do you have any thoughts about that?
It is of paramount importance. There is nothing more important than this current election. And I'm not talking about it because it's the next 4 years. I'm talking about it because we have to begin to plan a marathon in our lives. And and as they say in America, after Nipsey Hussle was murdered, the marathon continues. But when you plan in a marathon, you have to be able to realize that it's not enough to say, you know what, I got a plan for the next 5 years. We have to have intergenerational plans. We have to have plans that allow us not to just live the good life, but for us to begin to change the whole living experience for all of us as a people, starting with ourselves and then starting with our families and then going out. This is not just politics. They're using politics to control people's lives. And if we don't participate, there's a conversation in America right now where people are literally saying to themselves, I don't want to participate. I don't think that I should participate. Well, in America, if you live in America, if you're a citizen in America, non-participation is participation. Because this is a law, this is a system where voting happens, and everything that happens is through the voting process. Whether that means that you elect an official on the local level, which is even more important than the top. The presidency is one thing, but the people who are going to be the judges, the people who are running certain municipalities, the people who are in charge of various things that are very, very crucial and local to your own existence is more important. And as we look at it, this election, our part, see what happens, and I got to give a little bit away. I'm not sure if everybody has read the book, but what happens in Punching the Air, there's a moment where Amal and he gets the opportunity, and I think the other people there with him is participating in him helping create this mural, and then they're it's like that moment, like, wow, we did it, and you step back and you want to be able to come back tomorrow and see it again and have that same feel-good moment, or maybe even a better feel-good moment, and then you come back tomorrow and it's gone. But what happens? What is the story? What is the spiritual story being told there? The spiritual story being told is that you now know that you can do it. You now have to believe that that mural is there, even though you can't see it. And guess what? You can produce greater murals because they can't take away your mind. Because if wherever your mind goes, your body follows. And so if the real challenge is to remain mentally free, even though your body's in bondage, then you truly are free. But once you begin to believe again, and see I'm flipping it right back to this election. Too many people have given up their belief system into not believing that they can do it. Once we do it, we did it with Obama. But when we did it with Obama, we sat back and we said, after difficulty, there is relief. And we put our feet up and started celebrating. No, this was the beginning. This was to let us know that we had the power. And now, because I think globally, Black and brown folks are looked at as minority people. The truth of the matter is that we are majority people. We are not outnumbered. We are out organized. And so that's where we have to approach this at. Generational plans as opposed to weekend plans, as opposed to 5-year plans. And then when we are expiring, matter of fact, before we expire, everything that we are doing should be layered upon each other so that all that we do matters. And so as we are leaving, or as we have already left, when we package our deoxyribonucleic acid and pass it back to our future generations, they are getting legacy. They are getting direction. They are being still taught by the proverbial now ancestor. And that becomes a very real thing.
I think there's so much narrative in the Black community about being a good ancestor. Like, we start our ancestry journeys before we consider having children. We're just so aware of that. But Ibi, do you have any thoughts about the upcoming American election in relation to the book?
Never in a million years, when Donald Trump had put out that ad calling for the death penalty against those 5 teenage boys, never could we have imagined that 30 years later, he would become the president of the United States. Because the bigotry was so blatant, even when I was a child, even while Yusef was a teenager, that everything that they tell us about America being, this democracy, we believed it. We are taught in school to believe it. And then for this to happen, we think that history is behind us. There's racial progress. And then right now, and within the past 4 years, to see it revert, we know that this sort of bigotry, racism, hate is in the DNA of America. So yes, of course, everything that Yusef said, this election is incredibly crucial. For the world, it has an impact on the world. I'm sure, of course, in the UK, you might be getting some expats.
I've got
expats coming in.
I've got a calendar reminder. I've got, I'm staying up. I need to see what happens. I need to, it's not the country that I live in. And I live in a country that's never had a non-white leader. I've never experienced that. But so much of that conversation is bigger than one country and bigger than one story. And I think we're all talking about sort of the pandemic and everything else. We're all so connected now. And I think we're all, please let it be okay.
Hey, I tell you, one of the great things that we get the opportunity to do is we get the opportunity to vote early and then take our voting sticker and place it. I ain't gonna tell you who I voted for because y'all should already know. I tell you. But the other part of the voting reality in America is that everything that happens in America affects everything else around the world. And that is just the truth. Us being able to realize that and move from that perspective and understand and know, wow, we hope things get better, because it affects everything. We're all affecting each other. And America, being such a young nation, has this great opportunity to really take all of the brilliant things that all of the other nations are doing, starting with the criminal justice system, starting with policing. We are the #1 country that locks up the most people in the world. And it's so punitive and so damaging that part of that allows for other people to begin to believe the worst about themselves and then to become really criminal because of the system that they are underneath. Got a lot of work to do.
We're going to do it. We're all going to do it together because we are this connected world, and I have hope. I think we're having the same conversations that our parents were having, that our grandparents were having, and we are making small, iterative, sometimes invisible, always hard, but important and essential change. And I trust us. I think we can do it slowly and together. We've overrun the time a little bit, and I don't want to stop, but I think I have to. And so the question I'd like to end on for both of you, but maybe starting with Evie, is what are you ultimately hoping that readers of this incredible, moving, necessary, important book will take from it? What are you hoping is sort of the legacy of this work?
While this is a fictional book, a fictional character, it is representative of the emotional journey of a real person. This is inspired by Yusef's emotional journey, Yusef's perspective, the fact that this is a bright kid who understands things like classical art and can make a connection between a Picasso painting and what's happening in his gentrifying neighborhood. It's not something out of the ordinary. This was 16-year-old Yusef as an artist and poet. And this is a book about remembering the humanity of the people who make mistakes, people who are products of their environment, people who don't receive the love and attention that they need as children, and who end up, just not fitting into society's standards. Always remember the human, always remember the child when it comes to these stories.
Great, thank you. Yusef, do you have anything that you want people to take?
What she said. My hope is that Punching the Air becomes a part of required, necessary reading. We've gotten, like I said, so much positive feedback from everyone that has read this book that I can't imagine it not being something that teachers, educators provide for their students and say, hey, look, read this. Let's have a conversation after you read it. And of course, most children, when they see a book like this, they, oh my goodness, it's so thick. You want me to read it all? Yes, but then when you start reading it, you realize that you're being pulled through it. You realize that the stories, the poem, the imagery on the page is beautiful. There's artistry all throughout. Even the words on the page become art. This for me, perhaps maybe my most important work, because this is what lives on through the minds and the hearts of young people. Punching the Air.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, so much for creating this and for putting it into the world. It's so important, and I feel like it's got a lot of work to do, and I feel like it's doing it beautifully and powerfully. And I really appreciate that you've made this and you've given it to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you as well.
Is there anything that you would like to say before I wrap things up?
Yeah.
No, for those who haven't gotten it, pick it up.
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Sophie. Those were some great questions.
Yes, indeed.
Thank
you, Waterstones. Thank you so much for hosting us.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Waterstones. Thank you, both of you. Have a great evening in the UK or day, wherever else you are. And yeah, thank you. I love and appreciate what you've made, and I'm going to treasure it and keep it safe. So thank you so much.